Vai a farti fottere, stronzo arrogante. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Sharp, vicious, unforgivable, and the moment they left my lips, I knew my life would never be the same. Let me back up. It had been the worst shift of my life, and not saying something when you've worked in restaurants for 7 years. My feet ached in a way that made every step feel like walking on broken glass. My head pounded with the kind of migraine that comes from skipping meals and breathing in kitchen grease for 12 hours straight. And I'd just watched my manager pocket the tips that were supposed to be split among the staff. Again. The cash had been sitting there in the tip jar, $200, maybe more. Money I'd earned, smile by smile, table by table, enduring handsy customers and entitled complaints. Money that could have paid for Marco's medication this week. But I needed this job, desperately. My little brother Marco was sick, really sick. Leukemia, the kind that requires treatments that cost more than most people make in a year. The kind that turns a vibrant 12-year-old into a ghost of himself, too weak to even play video games most days. My parents had already sold everything. The house we grew up in, the car my father loved, my mother's jewelry that had been passed down through 3 generations. We were drowning in medical debt, sinking deeper every single day. And I was working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, just to keep Marco alive. So when my manager told me I had to stay late to serve a special party, even though my shift had ended an hour ago, even though I hadn't eaten all day and my stomach was cramping with hunger, even though I was supposed to visit Marco at the hospital and I'd already missed 2 visits this week, I smiled and said yes, because that's what you do when you have no choice. That's what you do when your little brother's life depends on you keeping this miserable, soul-crushing job. They arrived at 10:30. 7 men in suits that probably cost more than my yearly salary, custom-tailored, Italian leather shoes that clicked against the tile floor with authority. They moved through the restaurant like predators, and every other server suddenly became very busy in the kitchen, very interested in folding napkins or polishing already clean silverware. Even the busboys disappeared. My manager appeared at my elbow, his face pale and sweaty despite the air conditioning. His hand trembled as he gripped my arm. "Table 12. Be perfect. Don't mess this up." His voice was barely a whisper, urgent and terrified. "Who are they?" I asked, but I already knew I wouldn't get an answer. "Just be professional, very professional, and whatever you do, don't ask questions." Something in his voice made my skin crawl, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I nodded, because what choice did I have? I approached their table with my best professional smile plastered on my face, notepad ready, trying to ignore the way my exhaustion made everything feel slightly unreal, like I was moving through water, like this was happening to someone else. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Bellinate. Can I start you with—" "Where's Antonio?" one of them interrupted. Bald head, scar across his cheek that looked like it had been made by something sharp and deliberate, dead eyes that looked right through me. "We always get Antonio." My smile didn't falter, even though my heart rate kicked up. "I apologize, sir. Antonio called in sick this evening. I'll be taking care of you tonight." "We don't want you." He looked me up and down like I was something stuck to his shoe, something disgusting, something beneath his notice. "Get us a real server." Heat flooded my cheeks, but my voice stayed steady, professional. I dealt with worse. At least I told myself that. "I assure you I'm very experienced. I've been working here for—" "Do you even know what Prosecco is, sweetheart?" Another one laughed. Heavy set, gold rings on every finger that caught the light. A watch that probably cost more than Marco's last hospital bill. "Or are we going to have to translate the menu for you?" The others joined in the laughter. Mocking, cruel, the kind of laughter that's designed to humiliate, to make you feel small. One of them nudged his companion. "She probably thinks Prosecco is a type of pasta." More laughter, louder now. I thought about Marco in his hospital bed, about how he'd looked yesterday when I visited, so pale, so thin, trying to smile for me, even though I could see the pain in his eyes, about the bills piling up on our kitchen table, red stamps screaming final notice, about how desperately I needed this job, these tips, this income, about how I couldn't afford to lose my temper, no matter how much these men deserved it. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu," I said, my voice tight but controlled, professional, swallowing my pride like bitter medicine. "What, you can't take our order? Are you stupid or just incompetent?" The bald one leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like he'd just said something clever. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. A hairline fracture in my ability to keep taking this abuse. But I smiled, nodded, walked away with my head high and my hands clenched into fists at my sides. One table. Just get through one table. Then you can go home. Then you can cry in the shower where no one can see. And then, when I was just far enough away that I thought they couldn't hear me, when my back was turned and my hands were shaking with rage and humiliation and bone-deep exhaustion, I muttered in Italian, the language my grandmother taught me, the one I used when the world became too much, when I needed to vent without consequences. "Vai a farti fottere, stronzo arrogante. Spero che ti strozzi con il tuo cibo." Go fuck yourself, arrogant asshole. I hope you choke on your food. The words felt like fire leaving my mouth, like lava, a moment of rebellion, of reclaiming some small piece of dignity in a night that had stripped me of everything else. For just a second, I felt powerful. But then I heard it. Silence. Complete, terrifying silence from their table. The kind of silence that makes your blood run cold, that makes every survival instinct you have start screaming. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Oh no. Oh God, no. Slowly, so slowly, I turned around, and that's when I saw him for the first time. Really saw him. He sat at the head of the table, and I had no idea how I'd missed him before. Maybe because he'd been quiet, still. Maybe because the others had been so loud, so obnoxious, that he'd blended into the background. But now every cell in my body was aware of his presence. Hyper-aware, terrifyingly aware. He was younger than the others, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair swept back from his face, sharp features that looked carved from marble, a strong jaw, and eyes so intense they seemed to burn. Dark eyes, almost black in the dim restaurant lighting. He wore his power differently than the rest. Not loud and aggressive, not needing to prove anything, but quiet, controlled, absolute. The kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself, because everyone already knows. And he was staring directly at me. His expression was unreadable, but something in those eyes made my heart stop, made the world tilt sideways. He understood. Every single word. Oh God, what had I done? My hands started trembling worse. My vision narrowed. I couldn't breathe properly. One of the men started to stand, fury transforming his face into something ugly and violent. "You little..." But the man at the head of the table raised one finger. Just one. A simple, small gesture. And the angry man sat back down immediately, like a trained dog, like he'd been electrocuted. The power in that single gesture was terrifying. "Come here," the quiet man said. His voice was soft, controlled. Somehow that made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. There was command in it, the absolute certainty that he would be obeyed. My legs felt like water as I walked back to their table. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, to escape while I still could. But where would I go? How could I escape this? He knew where I worked, probably could find out where I lived with a single phone call. I stood before them, trying not to tremble visibly, trying to maintain some shred of dignity even though I felt like I was going to throw up. "Repeat what you just said," he commanded gently. I apologize, I didn't mean..." "Repeat it." Still soft, still terrifying, like velvet over steel. My throat was so dry I could barely speak. I was frustrated. I shouldn't have. In Italian, he interrupted, and there was something almost curious in his tone now. Say it again, in Italian, to my face this time. The room spun. This was it. This was how I'd lose my job, how I'd fail Marco, how I'd destroy everything we'd been fighting for, everything my family had sacrificed. But something in his eyes held mine, something that looked almost like curiosity, interest, not anger, not quite. I can't, I whispered, and I hated how weak my voice sounded. Why not? You had no trouble saying it behind my back. He'd tilted his head slightly, studying me. What changed? Because, swallowed hard, because I thought you couldn't hear me. Clearly, a ghost of a smile. But you said it anyway. Why? Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Because I need this job, because my little brother is dying and I can't afford to lose the income, because I was wrong and I'm sorry and I'll do anything. I stopped, heard how desperate I sounded, how pathetic. Your brother is sick? The question caught me off guard. There was something different in his voice now, something almost human? Yes. What's wrong with him? That's none of your... I caught myself, remembering who I was talking to, remembering the power in that single raised finger. Leukemia. He's 12. He needs treatments we can barely afford. Silence. He studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes seeing too much, reading me like a book. Then he turned to the bald man who'd insulted me first. Apologize to her. His eyes widened. Boss, You were disrespectful. Crude. You treated her like she was beneath you. His voice remained soft, but there was steel underneath, a command that would not be questioned. Apologize. Now. I could see the internal struggle on the bald man's face, the pride warring with obedience, the humiliation of having to apologize to someone he'd just mocked. But after a moment, he looked at me and muttered, "Sorry." It wasn't sincere, but it was something. The quiet man, the boss, turned back to me. What's your name? My heart hammered against my ribs. Does it matter? A ghost of a smile played at his lips. I like to know the names of people who curse at me, especially in such colorful Italian. I lifted my chin, finding some shred of courage I didn't know I still had. Then maybe your men should treat servers with basic respect. The table went completely silent. Someone sucked in a breath. I just talked back. Again. What was wrong with me? But the boss just smiled, actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger, almost approachable. Almost. Fair point. He leaned back in his chair, still watching me with those burning eyes. Your name? Sophia. Sophia. He said it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable, rolling it around in his mouth. I'm Lorenzo. Lorenzo. Even his name sounded dangerous, sounded like power and violence and things I didn't want to know about. Now, Sophia, since we've established that my men were disrespectful and you were exhausted and frustrated, shall we start over? I blinked, confused. This wasn't how I expected this to go. Yes? Good. We'd like to order, and perhaps, he glanced at his watch, expensive, understated, the kind that costs a fortune precisely because it doesn't look like it does. When does your shift end? It ended an hour ago. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or respect. Then, after you take our order, you're done for the night, with full pay, and tomorrow you'll come work for me instead. My brain couldn't process his words. They didn't make sense. What? You need money for your brother's treatment. I need someone in my organization who isn't afraid to speak the truth, even when it's dangerous. His eyes held mine, and I felt pinned by that gaze, trapped. I don't even know what you do. Yes, you do. His voice was quiet, final. And he was right. I did know. The expensive suits, the way other diners avoided looking at them, actually turned their heads away like eye contact might be dangerous. The way my manager was terrified, practically shaking when he told me to serve them. The deference, the power that radiated from their table like heat. I knew exactly what Lorenzo was, what they all were. The kind of man you read about in newspapers, the kind you see on true crime documentaries, the kind that operate in shadows and make people disappear. I can't, I heard myself say, even though part of me, the desperate drowning part, was already calculating what $50,000 a year could mean for Marco. Why not? Because I struggled to find words that made sense, that explained why I couldn't cross this line, even though I was already standing right on the edge of it. What kind of person curses at dangerous men in Italian thinking they won't understand? His tone was almost amused now, almost teasing. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the sheer insanity of this conversation, I almost laughed. Almost. Because he had a point, didn't he? What kind of person was I? Take our order, Sophia. He gestured to the menu, his movements controlled and deliberate. Then go home. Think about my offer. He pulled out a business card from his inner jacket and slid it across the table with 2 fingers. Thick cardstock. Expensive. Just a name and a phone number. Nothing else. Call me tomorrow. The number on that card reaches me directly. I stared at the card like it might bite me. And if I don't call? Then I'll assume you're content drowning in debt while your brother suffers, and I'll respect your choice. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly, so slightly I might have imagined it, but I hope you'll be smarter than that. The words should have felt manipulative, cruel even, but they didn't. They felt honest, brutally, terribly honest. I picked up the card with trembling fingers and slipped it into my apron pocket. Then I took their order, which they gave politely this time, with no more mockery or insults. And when I brought their food, Lorenzo thanked me. Actually thanked me. When they left 2 hours later, there was a stack of bills on the table. $500 for one table, one night. I stared at it, and something in my chest cracked wider. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of my tiny studio apartment, Lorenzo's card burning a hole in my pocket. Or maybe it was burning a hole in my conscience. I couldn't tell anymore. Work for him? For a man who was clearly involved in things I didn't want to know about? Things that were illegal, dangerous, probably violent. It was insane, dangerous, wrong. Every moral principle I'd been raised with screamed that this was a line I shouldn't cross. But when I visited Marco the next morning at the hospital, taking the bus because I couldn't afford the parking, walking through those sterile white hallways that smelled like disinfectant and despair, everything changed. My mother was sitting in the chair beside Marco's bed, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. Gray streaks in her hair I hadn't noticed before, lines around her eyes. Her hands, once steady and strong, now trembling as she held Marco's. The doctors kept talking about additional treatments and experimental options that insurance wouldn't cover, words like promising and cutting edge that all translated to the same thing: expensive, prohibitively expensive. And Marco, my brilliant, funny, brave little brother who used to spend hours building Lego sets and teaching himself coding, smiled at me and pretended he wasn't in pain. But I could see it, the way he shifted in bed, the way his breathing was shallow, the way his eyes had dark circles underneath that made him look decades older than 12. "Hey, Soph," he said, his voice weak but trying to sound cheerful. "You look tired." "I'm fine, kiddo." I sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle him. "How are you feeling?" "Like $1,000,000. He grinned, and it broke my heart. "The nurses say I might get to go home next week if my counts improve." "That's great, Marco." My mother caught my eye, and I saw the truth there, the fear, the exhaustion, the quiet desperation of watching your child suffer and being powerless to stop it.
After Marco fell asleep, she walked me out to the hallway. The insurance company denied the latest claim, the experimental treatment Dr. Patel recommended. They're calling it not medically necessary. Her voice cracked. How is saving my son's life not medically necessary? I felt something break inside me. How much? Don't worry about it, Sophia. Your father and I will figure something out. How much, Mom? She finally looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. $80,000 for the full treatment cycle. $80,000. We might as well need 80 million. We'll figure it out, I said, but we both knew that was a lie. There was nothing left to figure out, nothing left to sell, no more credit cards to max out, no more loans we could qualify for. We were out of options. I made the call from the hospital parking lot. My hands shook as I pulled out Lorenzo's card, as I dialed the number, as I waited for him to answer, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. He answered on the first ring. I was wondering if you'd contact me, he said, without even saying hello, like he'd been waiting, like he knew I would call. Maybe he did know. Maybe he'd seen the desperation in my eyes last night. What exactly would this job entail? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Initially, being my personal assistant, managing schedules, attending meetings, translation work. His tone was professional now, businesslike. Nothing illegal, nothing that would put you in legal jeopardy. You'd be handling the legitimate side of my business operations. And what's the illegitimate side? That's not your concern. You'd be kept separate from anything that could come back on you. A pause. I protect my people, Sophia. Always. I wanted to ask what that meant, what protecting looked like in his world, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. That's it? Just assistant work? That's it. $50,000 a year to start, full medical coverage for your entire family, including your brother's treatments. No limits, no denials. Whatever he needs, he gets. $50,000, full medical coverage. Marco could get the treatment he needed, the experimental therapy, the best doctors. My mother could stop working herself to death at the call center. My father could stop doing double shifts at the factory. We could breathe. We could survive. When do I start? I whispered. Monday, 9 a.m. I'll text you the address. A pause. You're making the right choice, Sophia. Was I? I had no idea. But I knew I'd do anything to save my brother, even if it meant crossing lines I never thought I would, even if it meant working for a man like Lorenzo. Working for Lorenzo was nothing like I expected. Yes, he was dangerous. Yes, he operated in a world of shadows and secrets, of hushed phone calls and meetings with men who looked like they'd seen and done terrible things. But he was also human, complicated, more than just the powerful, terrifying figure from that first night. He kept his word about Marco's treatment. Within a week, 1 week, my brother was transferred to the best oncology center in the state. Private room, team of specialists, experimental treatments that were not medically necessary suddenly became available. The bills stopped coming, the collection calls ended, the crushing weight of debt that had been suffocating my family just disappeared. My mother cried for 3 hours straight when I told her. She kept asking how this happened, how could we afford this? I told her I got a better job, better benefits. I didn't tell her who I was working for, what I suspected he did. She didn't need to know that part. She just needed to know Marco would be okay. And Lorenzo, he never asked for anything in return, except that I do my job well, which I did. I coordinated his schedule with meticulous precision, making sure he was never double booked, that he always had time between meetings to breathe. I translated documents from Italian to English and back again, contracts, letters, communications that were carefully worded to sound legitimate even when I suspected they weren't entirely. I learned the names of his associates, his enemies, the delicate balance of power he maintained like a tightrope walker. One wrong step and everything could collapse. But I also learned other things that didn't fit the narrative of dangerous mob boss I'd built in my head.
Like how he visited children's hospitals anonymously every month, paying for treatments for kids whose families couldn't afford them. How he'd built his empire after his parents were killed when he was 16, murdered by a rival family, leaving him alone and forced to become someone harder, colder, more ruthless than he'd ever wanted to be. How he read poetry late at night when he couldn't sleep, Dante, Petrarch, sometimes Neruda. How he carried the weight of dozens of families who depended on him for their livelihoods, for their safety, for their survival. He wasn't a good man, I knew that. I wasn't naive enough to romanticize what he did, but he wasn't a monster either. And somewhere between the late nights working in his office, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of expensive whiskey, the quiet conversations about everything and nothing, the moments when he'd look at me with something in his eyes I could name, something that made my breath catch and my heart race, I started to see him differently. Not as my employer, not as a dangerous man I should fear, as just a man, complex, flawed, human, which was dangerous for 1,000 reasons I tried desperately to ignore. It happened 3 months after I started working for him. 3 months of slowly forgetting why this was supposed to be temporary, why I was supposed to keep my distance, why getting close to someone like Lorenzo was the worst possible idea. We were in his office late one night, which had become our routine, working long after everyone else had gone home, going over contracts for a shipping company he was acquiring, legitimate business as far as I could tell, or at least paperwork that looked legitimate. His phone rang, shattering the comfortable silence. I watched his expression shift as he listened and felt ice slide down my spine. I'd learned to read his faces over these 3 months. This one meant trouble. When? His voice had gone deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. How many men? He listened for another moment, his jaw clenching tighter with each second. I'm on my way. He hung up and stood, his face like stone. All the warmth, the humanity I'd glimpsed moments before, vanished behind a mask of cold control. What's wrong? I asked, my heart starting to race. The Castellanos are moving against one of my warehouses. I have to go. The Castellanos. I knew that name, one of the rival families, the ones who'd been pushing into Lorenzo's territory for months now, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. Lorenzo! He stopped at the door, turning back, and for just a moment the mask cracked. I saw fear there, not for himself, but for what might happen, for what he might have to do. Go home, Sophia. Don't come back until I call you. What does that mean? It means things are about to get messy. His eyes met mine, and for just a moment I saw something vulnerable there, something that looked almost like regret. Don't come anywhere near it. I can help. No. The word was final, absolute. You're not part of this world, Sophia. Not this part, and I need to keep it that way. But, please. And that one word, soft and almost pleading, stopped me cold. Just go home. Stay safe. I'll call you when it's over. He left, and I sat alone in his office, fear coiling in my stomach like a living thing. I went home like he'd asked, but I couldn't stop checking my phone every 30 seconds, the screen lighting up my dark apartment. Couldn't stop imagining the worst, Lorenzo bleeding out in some warehouse, Lorenzo arrested, Lorenzo dead. Why did the thought of him getting hurt make my chest feel like it was caving in? When had he become more than just my employer? When had I started caring about him like this? I didn't sleep. I paced my tiny apartment, wearing a path in the carpet, watching the sky slowly lighten with dawn, and still my phone didn't ring. 2 days passed with no word. 48 hours of silence that felt like 48 years.
I tried to work, tried to focus on the mundane tasks of my old restaurant job that I'd kept part-time, more out of habit now than necessity. But my hands shook when I carried plates, my mind wandered during orders. I kept checking my phone every 30 seconds, the screen lighting up my dark apartment, never the message I desperately needed to see. "You okay?" one of the other servers asked me, watching me drop a fork for the third time. "Fine," I lied, "just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was terrified. Because somewhere in the past 3 months, Lorenzo had become more than just my employer, more than the dangerous man who'd given me a chance when I had nowhere else to turn. He'd become the person I thought about first thing in the morning, the person whose smile could make my entire day better, the person whose safety I cared about more than my own. And I had no idea if he was alive or dead. On the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I called his office, no answer. I called his cell, straight to voicemail. I even called the main business line, but whoever answered just said Mr. Moretti was unavailable and would I like to leave a message. No, I wouldn't like to leave a message. I wanted to know if he was breathing. So I went to his office building in the middle of the afternoon, my heart hammering, my palms sweating. The security guard at the front desk knew me by now, usually waves me through with a smile. But today he hesitated. "Miss Sophia, I don't think—" "Is he here?" I demanded. "He is, but he left strict instructions not to be disturbed." I was already moving past him, towards the elevators. He called after me, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. Lorenzo's secretary, Maria, a woman in her 50s who'd always been kind to me, stood up from her desk as I approached, her eyes wide. "Sophia, you can't go in there right now. Watch me. He specifically said no visitors." "I don't care." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I haven't heard from him in 3 days. I need to know he's alive." Something softened in Maria's expression. Understanding, maybe, or sympathy. "5 minutes," she said quietly. "Then I'm coming in to get you." I nodded and pushed through his office door without knocking. He stood at the window, back to the door, perfectly still, like a statue, like he'd been standing there for hours, maybe days, just staring out at the city below. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass, but somehow he looked like he was standing in shadow. "I told you not to come," he said, without turning, without even seeming surprised that I was there. Had he known I would come? Had he been waiting? I was worried. My voice came out smaller than I wanted, vulnerable. "Why?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy, loaded with meaning. Why was I worried? He was my employer, nothing more. That's what I should have said, what I should have believed. Except that was a lie and we both knew it. The pretending had stopped weeks ago if I was honest with myself. The careful distance I tried to maintain had eroded with every late night in his office, every quiet conversation, every moment when his eyes would linger on me just a second longer. Karaman, somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my boss. He turned then, slowly, and I saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight of whatever had happened over the past 3 days, pressing down on him like a physical thing. Dark circles under his eyes, a cut on his cheekbone that hadn't been there before, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of pain, physical or emotional, or both. But I also saw something else, something that made my breath catch and my heart stutter. The way he looked at me, like I was the only real thing in a world of shadows, like I was air and he'd been drowning. "You should leave." His voice was rough, broken, like the words cost him something to say. "What if I don't want to?"
Sophia, he took a step back, like proximity to me was dangerous, like I might burn him. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Then explain it to me." I moved closer, closing the distance he'd tried to create. "Tell me what happened. Tell me why you disappeared for 3 days. Tell me why you have a cut on your face and look like you haven't slept since I last saw you." "It's not your concern." "Like hell it isn't." The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. "You told me to go home and wait for your call. So I did. I waited.
For 3 days, Lorenzo. 3 days of not knowing if you were alive or dead or arrested or... My voice cracked. I hadn't realized how terrified I'd been until this moment, until the relief of seeing him alive threatened to overwhelm me completely. I'm sorry. He ran a hand through his hair, and I noticed his knuckles were bruised, scraped. I should have called. I needed to make sure everything was handled before I brought you back into this. Into what? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him weighing something, deciding how much truth he could tell me, how much truth I could handle. The Castellanos came at us hard, harder than I expected. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone reporting facts to avoid feeling them. We lost the warehouse. 3 of my men were injured. It could have been worse. Were you hurt? Nothing serious. Lorenzo. I'm fine, Sophia. But the way he said it told me he wasn't. Not really. I reached up and touched the cut on his cheekbone gently. He flinched, but didn't pull away. This doesn't look like nothing. It's just a cut. Stop. I let my hand fall. Stop pretending you're invincible. Stop acting like you don't need anyone. Stop pushing me away when all I want is to be here for you. That's exactly why I should push you away. His jaw clenched. Don't you see? The closer you get to me, the more danger you're in. The Castellanos know about you now. They've been watching. They know you matter to me. The words hung between us. You matter to me. I'm not stupid, Lorenzo. I know what you are, what you do. I held his gaze, refusing to look away even though my heart was racing. And I know I should run far away from you, that I should quit this job and never look back, that getting involved with you is probably the worst decision I could make. Then why don't you? His voice was barely a whisper. So why can't I? He stared at me, and I watched something break in his expression, some wall he'd been holding up crumbling. Because you're reckless, he said, taking a step toward me, brave to the point of stupidity, just like when you cursed at me in Italian that first night. Or maybe I was right in front of him now, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Maybe I see something in you that other people miss. And what's that? His voice had gone rough, raw. Someone who's trying to be better than the world expects. Someone who pays for children's medical treatments anonymously. Someone who reads poetry at 3 a.m. Someone who's tired of being alone. I paused, gathering courage for what I was about to say. Someone who cares about me as much as I care about him. For a moment, he just stared at me, and I saw the war happening behind his eyes, the struggle between what he wanted and what he thought was right, between protecting me and letting me in. Then he kissed me, sudden, desperate, his hands in my hair, pulling me close, and everything in me ignited. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was 3 days of fear and relief and hunger all tangled together. It was months of tension finally breaking. It was everything we'd been too afraid to say out loud. I kissed him back just as desperately, my hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer even though there was no space left between us. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, the world reduced to just this moment. This is a terrible idea, he whispered against my lips, but his hands were still in my hair, still holding me like he might never let go. I know. You could get hurt, used against me. The Castellanos already know about you. I know. I should fire you, send you away, keep you safe. But even as he said it, his grip tightened. I looked up at him, my hand on his chest, feeling his racing heart that matched my own. But you won't. No, he said softly, his forehead against mine, his eyes closed like he was in pain. God help me, I won't. I can't. I've tried. For 3 days, I tried to convince myself that pushing you away was the right thing to do, that keeping you at a distance would keep you safe. And all I could think about was you, whether you were okay, what you were thinking, if you hated me for disappearing. He opened his eyes, and the vulnerability there took my breath away. I've never been this weak before, Sophia. I've never let anyone become this important. That's not weakness, I whispered. That's being human. In my world, being human gets you killed. Then maybe it's time to start building a different world. He laughed quietly, the sound bitter and sad. You make it sound so simple. I know it's not. I know what you're involved in. I know the danger. I'm choosing this anyway, choosing you anyway. I paused. Unless, do you not want this? Want me? Not want you? He pulled back slightly to look at me properly, and I saw something fierce in his eyes. Sophia, I haven't been able to think about anything else for months. You walk into a room and everything else disappears. You smile and my whole day gets better. You challenge me and push back and refuse to be afraid of me, and it's the most terrifying, exhilarating being I've ever experienced. My breath caught. Lorenzo. I want you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. So much it scares me, so much that I'm willing to risk everything, my reputation, my control, my carefully constructed distance from everything, just to have this, to have you. I kissed him again, softer this time, a promise, a choice. Then have me, I whispered against his lips. I'm here, I'm choosing this. Whatever comes next, we face it together. But loving Lorenzo came with a price I didn't fully understand until it was almost too late. 6 weeks. That's all we had. 6 weeks of stolen moments and secret smiles and nights that turned into mornings in his penthouse. 6 weeks of learning what it meant to be with someone who lived in constant danger. 6 weeks of pretending we could make this work. 6 weeks of happiness before everything fell apart. It happened on a Tuesday night, late. I was leaving his building after working later than usual, finishing up some translations that needed to be done before a meeting the next morning. The street was quiet, most of the office workers long gone, just a few cars passing by. I was thinking about Lorenzo, about the way he'd kissed me goodbye, about the dinner plans we'd made for the weekend. I didn't hear the car pull up beside me until it was too late. A black sedan, windows tinted, engine purring. Something in my stomach twisted. Wrong. This felt wrong. I started walking faster, my heels clicking urgently on the pavement, my hand reaching for my phone. But before I could pull it out, before I could even scream, someone grabbed me from behind, a hand over my mouth, a rough chemical-smelling cloth pressed against my nose and lips, an arm around my waist, lifting me off my feet. I struggled, kicked, tried to bite the hand covering my mouth. But the world was already going fuzzy, tilting, darkness creeping at the edges of my vision. The last thing I heard was a voice, cold and satisfied. Lorenzo's going to love this. And everything went dark. I'll tell you what happens next. How I woke up in an abandoned warehouse with zip ties cutting into my wrists and 3 men staring at me like I was a piece of meat. How Lorenzo's enemies thought I could use me as leverage. How I learned exactly how dangerous loving a man like him could be. How terror feels when it's not abstract anymore, but concrete and immediate and suffocating. But I'll also tell you how Lorenzo came for me, how he walked into that warehouse alone, offering himself in exchange for my freedom, how I watched him face down 6 armed men without flinching, his eyes locked on mine the entire time, how he moved through violence like a dancer, every motion precise and deadly, how he carried me out of there afterwards, whispering promises against my hair that he never let anyone hurt me again. And how, in that moment, covered in someone else's blood and shaking with adrenaline and fear, I realized something terrifying and true. I didn't just care about him anymore. I loved him. Completely. Impossibly. Irrevocably. Even though it could destroy me. Maybe especially because of that. Because love isn't always safe. Sometimes it's choosing someone knowing full well they come with danger and darkness and complications. Sometimes it's standing beside them anyway and saying, I'm here, I'm staying, I'm not afraid. Even when you absolutely should be afraid. Even when every logical part of your brain screams that this is insane. Even when the cost might be everything. The full story of what happened in that warehouse, how we survived and what it cost us, that's coming. But first, you need to understand this. Some love stories don't start with a meet cute. They start with an insult muttered in anger, with a man who understood every word, with a choice to be brave when everything screamed to run away. They start with truth, messy and dangerous and real. And sometimes that's the only kind of love worth having. But let me tell you exactly what happened in that warehouse, because it changed everything. The cloth over my mouth smelled like chemicals, sharp, acrid, the kind of smell that burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water. When I woke, my hands were zip-tied to a metal chair, my head pounding like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my skull. My vision was blurry, everything swimming in and out of focus. Cold concrete beneath my feet. I'd lost one of my shoes somewhere. Dim lights overhead flickered and buzzed. The smell of oil and rust and something else. Something metallic that made my stomach turn. Blood. Old blood. Classic abandoned warehouse. How original. I tried to move my hands, testing the zip ties. They bit into my wrists, tight enough to cut off circulation. My arms were pulled behind the chair, shoulders screaming in protest. How long had I been unconscious? 3 men stood in front of me, watching, waiting. The one in the middle, tall, thin, snake-like with slicked-back hair and a suit that probably cost a fortune, smiled when he saw I was awake. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. Predatory. Cruel. "Good, you're up." He took a step closer, hands in his pockets like we were having a casual conversation. "I'm Alessandro Castellano." He said it like I should be impressed, like his name should mean something to me. It did. I had heard Lorenzo mention that name before, always with tension in his voice, always with warning. "And you, sweet Sophia, are going to help me send a message to Lorenzo Moretti." My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady, refused to let him see my fear. He won't negotiate, not for me. It was a lie, I knew it was a lie, but maybe if I could convince Alessandro I wasn't valuable, he'd let me go. Maybe I could talk my way out of this. "No," Alessandro tilted his head, studying me like I was an interesting insect. "No, that's not what my sources tell me. They say Lorenzo has gotten soft, that he actually cares about his little assistant." He leaned closer, and I could smell cigarettes on his breath, expensive cologne trying to cover up the stench. "So here's what's going to happen. We're going to call him, you're going to tell him where you are, and he's going to come here and trade himself for you." "And then what? You kill him?" "Probably." Alessandro shrugged, like we were discussing the weather, like ending someone's life was just another Tuesday. "Unless he agrees to certain terms, gives up his territory, hands over his operations. Either way, his empire falls apart without him." "You're an idiot if you think his men won't retaliate." I met his eyes, letting him see my contempt. "You kill Lorenzo, and you'll have a war on your hands that'll never end." Alessandro's smile vanished. His hand shot out, grabbing my chin hard enough to bruise, forcing me to look at him. "Careful, girl. The only reason you're still breathing is because you're useful. Once Lorenzo is here, you're disposable. A loose end. And I don't leave loose ends." Fear shot through me, cold and sharp, but I refused to look away. He released my chin with a shove that made my head snap back. Then he pulled out a phone, dialed, put it on speaker. The ringing seemed to echo in the warehouse. Once, twice. Lorenzo answered immediately. "Who is this?" His voice. God, just hearing his voice made tears burn my eyes, made me realize how terrified I'd been that I'd never hear it again. "You know who this is, Moretti, and I have something of yours." Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Then, "If you've heard her, she's fine for now, but that depends entirely on you." Alessandro held the phone closer to me, and I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "Say hello, Sophia." I met Alessandro's eyes, and in that moment I made a choice. I could beg Lorenzo to stay away, to save himself. I could cry and plead and give Alessandro exactly what he wanted. proof that I was terrified that Lorenzo would do anything for me. Or I could trust that Lorenzo had a plan, that together we were smarter than these men, that the past 6 weeks of late-night conversations and shared secrets meant something. Julie, they never surrender. So for some reason, our writer decided to break up the same line into 2 smaller lines, each with a tag, with lines ending on tact, which makes for a stilted read, which means I have to read the same line each time, which makes it clear that the monologuer is processing grief. I guess that's fine after all these people dying. Poutgum dial.
Here's the address, Alessandro was saying into the phone, and I heard him rattle off a location I didn't recognize. You have 1 hour. Come alone or she dies. Bring any of your men and I'll send her back to you in pieces. I'll be there, Lorenzo said, his voice cold as ice. And Castellano, if she has so much as a scratch on her when I arrive, there's no deal, no negotiation, just war. Alessandro laughed, big words from a man with no leverage. He hung up, looking pleased with himself. Now we wait, he said, gesturing to his men. Watch her. I'm going to prepare our welcome from already. Make sure everything's ready. He walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse, leaving me with 2 men. One by the door, young, maybe mid-20s, trying to look tough, but his hands kept fidgeting with his gun, nervous. One closer, older, scarred, scrolling on his phone with the bored expression of someone who'd done this 100 times before. I had less than an hour to figure out how to stay alive, less than an hour to be ready. I closed my eyes, taking slow breaths, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to remember everything from that self-defense class, trying to think like Lorenzo would think. What were my advantages? The zip ties were in front of me, not behind. That was something. I could move my arms, use them as a weapon if I had to. My grandmother's ring was still on my finger. I could feel its familiar weight. And these men were underestimating me. They saw a scared assistant, a helpless victim. They didn't see someone who'd survived 7 years of restaurant work, dealing with handsy customers and aggressive drunks. Someone who'd fought tooth and nail to save her brother's life. Someone who'd fallen in love with one of the most dangerous men in the city and hadn't run away. They didn't see someone who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. I opened my eyes and waited. Lorenzo arrived in 40 minutes. I heard his car outside, the engine cutting off, then footsteps, confident, measured. The door opened with a screech of rusted metal, and there he was, hands raised, showing he was unarmed, but I knew better. Lorenzo was never unarmed. His mind was a weapon. His timing was a weapon. And right now, he was calculating every angle, every possibility, every move 3 steps ahead. Our eyes met across the warehouse, and something passed between us, an understanding, a promise. Let her go, he said calmly, like he was asking for a cup of coffee. Alessandro appeared from the shadows, 3 more men with him now. 6 total, 6 against 1, except Lorenzo never played fair in his life. Not how this works, Moretti. First, we discuss terms. There are no terms. You wanted me, you have me. Sophia walks free. She does, eventually, after we've secured certain assurances, after you sign over your operations to my family, after you agree to leave the city and never come back. Lorenzo laughed, actually laughed. You think I'm going to sign anything while you're holding a gun to her head? You think you don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Lorenzo took a step forward, and I saw Alessandro's men tense. Here's mine. You let her go right now, unharmed, and in exchange, I'll consider not killing every single person in this room. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Big talk from a man outnumbered 6-1. Is that what you think this is? 6 against 1? Lorenzo's smile was terrifying, cold, final.
You haven't been paying attention." His eyes found mine across the warehouse, and I saw the question there. "Are you hurt? Are you ready?" I shook my head slightly. Not hurt, ready. His gaze held mine for one more second, and I saw it. The signal, the slight nod. Now. I slammed my hands down on the chair arms and surged upward with every ounce of strength I had, swinging the chair, still attached to my wrists by the zip ties, into the guard closest to me. The metal connected with his skull with a sickening crack that I felt reverberate through my bones. He went down hard, blood already pooling beneath his head. At the same moment, Lorenzo moved. Fast, lethal, graceful as a dancer. He had a knife from somewhere, ankle probably, and the guard by the door was falling before Alessandro could even process what was happening, clutching his throat, eyes wide with shock. Alessandro pulled a gun, swinging it toward Lorenzo, but I was already moving, chair and all, throwing my full weight at him. We crashed to the ground together in a tangle of limbs, and I felt the gun discharge, deafening in the enclosed space, the sound ripping through my ears, but the bullet went wild, pinging off metal somewhere above us. Alessandro tried to bring the gun around, tried to aim at me, but I smashed my zip-tied hands into his face, my grandmother's ring connecting with his nose. I felt cartilage crunch under the impact. Blood spurted hot across my hands. Then Lorenzo was there, kicking the gun away across the concrete, hauling Alessandro up by his collar like he weighed nothing. "You made a mistake," Lorenzo said quietly, too quietly. His voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes were burning with fury. "You touched something that belongs to me." "Your men are outside," Alessandro gasped, blood streaming from his shattered nose. "No, mine are." Lorenzo's smile was terrifying, cold, final. "You really thought I'd come alone, that I'd risk her life on the chance you'd play fair." The warehouse doors burst open, all of them at once, and suddenly the space was flooded with Lorenzo's people. 10, 15, maybe more, armed, ready. The fight was over before it began. Alessandro's remaining men dropped their weapons, hands raised. Smart. They knew when they were beaten. Lorenzo threw Alessandro to his men like garbage. "Take him somewhere quiet. I'll deal with him later." He paused, his voice dropping to something deadly. "And make sure his family knows that anyone who comes after what's mine will share his fate, that hurting her is the last mistake they'll ever make." The cold authority in his voice should have scared me. Maybe it would have 3 months ago, when I was still naive enough to believe in clear lines between good and bad. But now I understood. This is who he had to be to survive, to protect the people he cared about, to protect me.
Then he turned to me and everything changed. The cold authority vanished, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. His hands were gentle, so gentle, as he pulled out another knife and cut the zip ties binding my wrists to the chair. The plastic fell away, and I could finally move my arms, feel blood rushing back into my hands. "Are you hurt? Did they—" His hands were on my face, my arms, checking for injuries, trembling slightly. "I'm okay." My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, now that the reality of what had just happened was crashing over me. "Lorenzo, I'm okay." He pulled me against him, his arms tight around me, and I felt how badly he was shaking too, how terrified he'd been, how close to losing control. "When they took you," he breathed into my hair, his voice breaking, "I lost my mind. I was ready to burn the entire city down to find you, to kill anyone who stood in my way. I would have destroyed everything." I pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in my hands. "But you didn't. You stayed smart. You planned. You came for me." "Because you gave me that message, reminded me you could fight too." His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. "You're extraordinary, Sophia. Do you know that? You were zip-tied to a chair, surrounded by armed men, and you still fought back,
still stayed calm enough to signal me, still refused to be helpless. Before I could answer, one of his men approached, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Boss, what do you want us to do with Castellano?" Lorenzo's expression hardened. All the vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold calculation. He glanced at me, then back to his man. "Take him somewhere quiet. I'll deal with him later." He paused. "And make sure his family knows that anyone who comes after what's mine will share his fate, that this was mercy compared to what happens next time." We went back to his penthouse. He wouldn't let me out of his sight, kept touching me like he needed to confirm I was real, his hand in mine, his arm around my waist, his fingers brushing my hair back from my face, like if he stopped touching me, I might disappear. "Shower," he said gently when we got inside. "Get cleaned up. Wash all of this away. I'll make us something to eat." The hot water felt like heaven. I stood under it until my skin was red and pruned, until the water ran clear instead of pink from the blood on my hands, Alessandro's blood, not mine, washing away the fear, the smell of that warehouse, the feeling of helplessness even though I'd fought back. When I came out, wrapped in one of his shirts that fell to mid-thigh, he was standing at the window, looking out at the city lights below, the city he controlled, the city that had almost taken me from him. "I can't do this anymore," he said without turning around. My heart stopped. Ice flooded through my veins. "Can't do what? Pretend that you're just my assistant, that this thing between us is casual, that I could survive losing you?" He turned, and his eyes were raw, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "Alessandro was right about one thing. I've gotten soft because of you." I walked to him slowly, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. "Is that a bad thing?" "In my world, yes. It makes me vulnerable, makes you a target." His jaw clenched, and I saw the war happening behind his eyes. "I should end this, fire you, send you away where you'll be safe, put you on a plane to another city, another country, somewhere the Castellanos and everyone else can never find you." "We tried that conversation already," I reminded him, reaching up to touch his face. "Didn't work then either." "Sophia." "Listen to me." I put my hands on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath my palms. "Yes, I'm a target now. Yes, loving you is dangerous. Tonight proved that. But you know what's more dangerous? Living a half-life, playing it safe, never taking the risk, spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been. You could die. We all die eventually. The question is whether we really live first." I looked up at him, willing him to understand. "And being with you, this terrifying, complicated, dangerous thing we have, this is living, Lorenzo. This is real. This is worth fighting for." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he kissed me, deep and desperate, his hands tangling in my wet hair, pulling me closer like he could somehow merge us into one person, like he could keep me safe by never letting go. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. "I love you," he whispered. "God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me, more than anything in my life has ever terrified me." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I love you too, even though you're impossible, even though you're dangerous, even though every logical part of my brain screams that this is insane." He laughed quietly, the sound rough and broken. "We're both insane then." "Good." I kissed him again, softer this time. A promise, a choice. Sanity is overrated anyway. Loving Lorenzo meant accepting his world, learning to navigate the danger, understanding that some nights he'd come home covered in blood that wasn't his, and I'd have to clean him up without asking questions. It meant accepting protection I didn't want, guards watching my apartment, security following me to visit Marco, constant surveillance that felt suffocating. But it also meant waking up with someone who looked at me like he was his entire world. It meant having someone who'd walk through fire for me, who'd taught me to shoot a gun, just in case, who'd once spent 4 hours helping Marco with his homework via video call because he didn't want me to feel alone. It meant building something real in the spaces between the darkness.
6 months after the warehouse incident, Marco went into remission. The doctors called it remarkable. My mother called it a miracle. I called it Lorenzo, who'd made sure my brother got the absolute best care, who'd never asked for thanks, who just smiled when I told him the news and said, "Good, he deserves to be healthy, to have a real childhood." "He asks about you," I told Lorenzo one night as we lay tangled together in his bed. "Wants to meet the mysterious benefactor who saved his life." Lorenzo went still. "Sophia, I know, I haven't told him, but—" I traced patterns on his chest. "Maybe someday, when things are safer, when he's older, he should know who helped us. He should know his sister did that. You're the one who fought for him, who worked 3 jobs, who never gave up. And you're the one who gave me the means to actually save him." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I never thought I'd have this." "Have what?" "Someone to come home to. Someone who knows everything I am and stays anyway. A reason to be better than I was." His arms tightened around me. "You changed my life, Sophia. That night you cursed at me in Italian, that was the beginning of everything." I smiled against his chest. "Best insult I ever muttered." "Worst timing you ever had." "Best timing," I corrected. "Perfect timing, because it brought me to you." I wish I could tell you that everything was smooth after that we lived happily ever after with no more complications. But this is the real world, and Lorenzo's life is complicated. There were more threats, more enemies, more nights when I wondered if this time would be the time he didn't come home. But there were also mornings waking up together, quiet dinners, stolen moments, the slow building of something that looked almost like a normal life, even though we both knew it wasn't. And through it all, there was love, fierce, complicated, dangerous, real. The kind of love that starts with words you shouldn't say, with risks you shouldn't take, with choices that don't make sense on paper, but make perfect sense in your heart. 2 years later, I stood in Lorenzo's office, our office now, reviewing contracts when he walked in with a small black box. My heart jumped. "What's that?" "Open it," he said quietly. Inside was a ring, simple, beautiful, a diamond that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. "I know my life is dangerous," Lorenzo said, dropping to one knee. "I know I can't promise you safety or normalcy or any of the things a good man should offer, but I can promise you truth, loyalty, a love that will never quit, no matter how hard things get." Tears were already streaming down my face. "I can promise that every day I'll wake up and choose you, that I'll fight for you, protect you, stand beside you through whatever comes." His eyes held mine. "Marry me, Sophia. Be my partner in every sense of the word. Help me build something better than what came before." I should have thought about it, weighed the risks, considered the implications. Instead, I dropped to my knees in front of him and kissed him. "Yes," I whispered against his lips. "Yes, of course yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, and I felt the weight of it, the promise, the future we were choosing together, despite everything. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him later, curled up together watching the sunset. He laughed, the sounds warm and genuine. "Never. You were fierce, honest, completely yourself. How could I regret the moment I met the woman who'd change my entire life? Even though I called you an arrogant asshole? Especially because of that." He kissed my temple. "You saw through all the power and posturing straight to the truth. You weren't afraid of me.
You just saw a man being a jerk and called him out. I was terrified, I admitted, but you did it anyway. That's what makes you extraordinary. I looked at the ring on my finger, catching the last rays of sunlight. You know what's funny? If someone had told me that night that I'd end up marrying the man I insulted, I would have thought they were crazy. We are a little crazy, Lorenzo agreed, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Neither would I, because some of the best things in life start with a mistake, with words you can't take back, with a risk that doesn't make sense, with a curse muttered in Italian that changed everything. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I know now, all the danger and fear and complication, I'd still walk up to that table. I'd still let my exhaustion and anger get the better of me. I'd still mutter those words, because they led me to him, to this impossible, beautiful, dangerous love, to home. Vai a fotterti, stronzo arrogante. Best words I ever said.